Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. So this week's episode started off with a interesting case where we had a chef dying from what was essentially snake venom, but it was a special type of snake venom that if you ingest it, it won't kill you because the body, your acids in your bodies will break it down, so it's not deadly in that sense, but it is deadly if it gets introduced into the blood system. And basically, this dude was eating frogua. The chef was eating frogua, and essentially, there was actually fiberglass kind of finely grind up into it. So when he was eating it, essentially, it was kind of making small incisions into his mouth or whatever, and so that led to it kind of being introduced into his blood system, ends up inadvertently killing him. It seems like this was kind of a targeted attack against a specific group because there was like 7 people who ordered it or whatever. Well, there was a group of 7 that ordered it. Now, basically, there are these 7 who, one of them in particular, I can't remember the actor's name. He's been in a lot of stuff. He was Gabe in Beauty and the Beast. I don't remember his name from Heroes, but he was kind of the scientist dude, the one that from the very beginning he was following in his father's footsteps, trying to understand this whole human evolution thing and people with powers. He was in Covert Affairs and whatnot. So, yeah. He was in this episode. I was actually, usually using your mind, you're kind of like, oh yeah. I was like, obviously he's probably the killer or whatnot. I was thinking that in the back of my mind. Turns out he's not the killer, but I'll get to that later on. But essentially, him and his other friends were basically part of a group known as IAO. Essentially, it's like an internet organization that exists in layman's terms, they protect you by basically checking websites. That basically when you click on a website, it isn't a fake website used to look like an actual web page, but it's actually meant to collect your personal information. They go to make sure that every web page you open across the internet is that real web page and not just a fake put in place. They don't do it hand by hand. They literally have an algorithm that is put together with. The fact is, it's such a very complex thing that it'd be impossible to have access to it because they have cards that are connected to it's like locks upon contingency plans to kind of force you not to be in a situation, because it's like if you took this algorithm, well, you could do some pretty bad things with it. This in turn basically leads to someone basically after the murders and everything, and after everything's kind of figured out, it's like, hey, this is all like an attack. We're going after the stock market exchange next. We're going to make it come crashing down. We already attacked the IAO. We took them down. Now we're about to take down the stock market exchange, which, Watson and Sherlock go check it out. But then it's like, oh yeah, that was actually a hoax. The entire thing was a hoax. Even the murders was just a precursor for an art heist. It was all the kind of, it was like a plan upon a plan upon a plan type of situation. So all of these murders, this fake hoax about going after the stock market exchange was for the sole purpose of getting in and stealing some paintings. Unfortunately, one of the guys involved wasn't so lucky and ended up getting killed, specifically by the snake. And I love the fact is that Joan was there being like, and Sherlock's like, yeah, he got bitten by the snake. And she's like, how can you be so sure about it? It's like, it's because it's right there behind you. She's like, okay, what did I do? He's like, first thing I would advise is try not to get bitten. And I was like halfway, part of me is like, well, you could jump on a bed, but then I guess that'd be kind of contaminating evidence since the dude's body's laying on a bed and everything. Even though the fact is that Sherlock took it as a pet afterwards. Not really a pet, but he was looking after it till like he could get it in the hands of someone in the zoo, because if they captured it, essentially they'd eradicate, because it's a very rare species of snake, which I'm not that comfortable with snakes either. But I love the fact that Joan is just kind of like, because she's looking at him, she's like, why is Clive, the turtle, just like, isn't that his name? Or am I thinking of somebody else? Essentially, their pet turtle's like, why is he roaming around? It's like, oh yeah, because I had to give his cage to the snake. And she's just like, oh god, just okay. Sure. He's like, oh, you could go over there and smell it. The guy's his place didn't smell like someone who took care of a snake, or, who owned a snake and their place would smell like it. And she's like, no. I'll take your word for it. Turns out, I love the fact is that the killer is actually the first guy one of the chef, one of the cooks at the restaurant that Chef Joe died at, basically is what I'm trying to understand is from what Sherlock was saying, did he actually do it this way, or was that like scientifically speaking, that's BS? Essentially, ingesting a certain amount of poison will eventually gain you immunity from it. Well, from the way they make it sound like it wasn't an intentional thing, it was kind of just a side effect because he was basically milking his snake, and every time he would get bit by it, but it's just kind of like, okay, it's okay. I'm helping fight off I'm building an immunity to it and everything. So all of this like was set in motion to just he kind of gave himself the perfect alibi by being poisoned too, because it's like once you're poisoned, no one's actually going to look at you and pay you any attention. It's like, oh, obviously he's not the killer behind this, because why would the killer poison himself? I mean, who would put themselves in that much danger? But it's like, once again, if you kind of build up an immunity to the poison, you don't have to worry about it, causing any problems. I mean, because that is the question of like, why is it that he survived but not Joe? Because like, even if you took a small bite, there's fiberglass mixed in there, so it should have cut you open and you should have died no matter how small of a bite you took, because it's being ingested into your blood system and it's circulating all over the place. But granted, I guess the more of it you eat, the more venom that's put into your blood system. So if you took one bite, you've only got that much poison. So I guess it makes sense, but still a very interesting case. But that in itself was only half the episode, because the other half of the episode, because I thought it was going to turn into a bigger thing. I thought that was kind of the main part of the main part of the episode, but it only actually turned out being a small fraction of the episode. Is that basically Bell is a court case. He's testifying about this guy who basically robbed the place and then killed the guy after robbing him. And essentially he's saying like, oh, he kind of testifies that like he knew it was this guy because there was someone else who he had a witness verifying, be like, oh yeah, it was this guy who did it. But then afterwards, the guy kept asking him questions and everything. He's like, oh, are you sure? I'm just getting this right for the jury. Are you sure? And then Bell was like, yeah. So in his mind, he was like, I think I might have perjured myself, because basically he misinterpreted Sherlock's note. Sherlock never said that that particular person who Bell kind of labels as the eyewitness directly saw the guy, whether it was going into the shop or leaving or whatever the case may be, knowing that the guy was there, placing him at the scene of the crime at any point in time, whether it was at the time of the crime, beforehand, whatever the case may be. The fact of the matter is, Sherlock deduced it was him because basically, he's like, oh, there was obviously certain things like broken bottles outside, fragrances that he was just like, oh, it obviously points that he was there, and everything. Basically doing what Sherlock does, and it's just kind of like him and Bell kind of had to answer questions. Bell ended up talking to the eyewitness, kind of forced him to be like, not really force him, but made him go like, okay, you're right, I did see him there. Got his his confession written down, so it's kind of like, okay, now that's kind of added in evidence, so they can't try and twist it and kind of get the guy off, because it's like, oh yeah, that Bill technically lied. It's just really, like, if you want to break it down, like, to me, some heavy technicalities and everything. So in the long run, you see Sherlock's there seeing the interaction between the ADA and Bell and everything, and then she's like, oh, Sherlock, next time, Mr. Holmes, like, be a little more careful with your paperwork and everything. And Bell's like, oh no, actually, and Sherlock said, you're right, it's 100% my fault, I'll make up for it and everything. And Bell's like, why did you take the fall from me? He's like, well, if I'd known that you like the ADA. He's like, what? I don't like. He's like, yeah, you totally have an infatuation with it. Is that why I was wondering, it's like, you could have handled this by yourself and everything. He's like, but you wanted me here as your scapegoat, which is like, fine, if you need me to be as your scapegoat, your wingman, I'm fine with that and everything. Which he's like, yeah, I like her. Which in itself, it kind of brings up an interesting thing, because it's like, for Bell, he's kind of like, for them, a big part of it is like talking about their work. Now, because in this episode, we see Fiona for the first time, and it's like, since last season, I was bringing that up. I brought it up probably more than once or whatever in these episodes and stuff, being like, oh yeah, we haven't seen hide nor hair of her for a while. I think the last episode, they kind of referenced it at the beginning of the episode, was kind of the last time we saw them was when her and Sherlock essentially had sex, because that was kind of a thing. He was kind of afraid to kind of take the next step with her and whatnot. So, but nevertheless, it was just kind of like, it was nice seeing them kind of chatting, because apparently she's in Philadelphia for work reasons, which, Sherlock didn't really know that, because that was kind of a thing that sparked between the conversation he had with Bell, is because it's like, It's like, oh, you actually talk about work? It's like, yeah, because it's kind of like, obviously our interest is a part of our lives and everything. So obviously we're going to talk about it. It's like, you can't just kind of ignore that part of your day, just being like, oh yeah, how was work and everything. It's kind of part of like your job. Like it's kind of hard to put it. It's like your job is an important part of your kind of relationship, because it's like, it's kind of something that you kind of share and you kind of communicate over type of thing. It's like, you don't have to tell them all the boring details, but you do have to, because that is a part of your life. And for Sherlock, that it's even more so than others, because for him, being a detective isn't, being a consultant isn't just about, a job. For him, it's his life. It's part of him. And so it begs the question, because he has a conversation with Joan. It's like, I never actually talked to her about work. Neither one of us does. She was in Philadelphia for a month, and I didn't find out till now that because it was like work related reasons and stuff like that. It's like we don't have that type of relationship. With Joan, it's like that's kind of fine. Relationships work differently and everything. Now, he brings up something very interesting that I wasn't expecting. He's kind of like, the fact of the matter, it's different from his previous relationship with one Irene Adler, aka Jamie Moriarty, because I was about to slip up there. I was like, about to say James, I was like, no, Jamie Moriarty. Being that basically like because that's kind of like his only relationship that he's ever been in was with her. And the fact of the matter is there was such heaviness and just, that's the only way I could describe it, to the relationship. And now he sees like he cares for Fiona, but the fact of the matter is that he can't even open up about that, something that's very him, to the person that he can, like is saying that he loves. Then it kind of it makes him wonder, is it right? Because it's like, because it almost feels inferior to the relationship he had with Irene, which you had Joan being like, okay, don't really bring that up, because it's like, for one, you and Moriarty can and never should happen again. So it's like, if you don't, at the end of the day, what it comes down to, asking Sherlock is, how do you feel about her? Do you love her or not? That's the question you have to ask yourself. And at the end of the episode, we have him possibly breaking up with her. I don't know. Part of me hopes that he didn't, because it's like, I like them together, they're cute and everything, but at the same time, it's like, if you're not in love with someone, you kind of just have to, you just gotta let them know. There's no point in being in a relationship when you don't love the other person. Not to say he doesn't care about her or like her, but, maybe, love isn't the right word for it, because it's like, doesn't feel as, because if it can't compare to how he felt about Moriarty, like, no matter how messed up and twisted their relationship is with all the lies and her being like an international criminal at the top of a large-scale organization like the cabal that she led and everything, then it's kind of begs the question of like, but like it's kind of that situation of like, you really shouldn't be comparing relationships and stuff like that. It's not fair, but at the same time, it's like, if you can't even match the emotion from another relationship, to expand upon it, like this new relationship, he should be feeling more. But if he's not feeling that more, once again, another existential kind of thing I'm having tonight. So this is the second time, because I did it earlier with Once Upon a Time and everything. So, but nevertheless, it's just, I don't know, it's sad, but because Joan brought up a very interesting point, being like, the fact of the matter is, Sherlock actually doesn't have experience with breaking up with anyone. The only reason why him and Moriarty broke up is because, as Irene, she faked her death and everything, and it's like, that doesn't count, so like, you never actually had to break up with anyone, so this is your first time. So like I said, she kind of recited something, it was kind of a quote from something or someone, and was telling him to, hey, use that. So like, as we see at the end, he's kind of getting like a Skype call or something from her, and he's reciting it, and then the episode ends. So whether he does or not, I don't know. Like I said, part of me wishes he didn't, because it's like, this is our only relationship we've ever seen Sherlock in. Obviously, he has his casual flings with certain people to kind of help him keep his mind motivated and everything. But obviously, just like the first relationship, because we never actually got to see, we got to see a little bit of what he was like around Irene to a certain extent. Back when he thought Irene was just Irene, and it's like, oh, she's actually alive, she's not actually dead. But then finding out, it's like, oh, she's actually Moriarty. Because even then, the dynamics of their relationship changed and everything. But you could still see that even then, when knowing her as Moriarty, it changed the way he felt about her and everything. Which, I bring it up again, I want to see more Natalie Dormer. I want to see her as Moriarty. Come on, it's been a while. Legitimately, I think the last time she popped up in the show, fully popped up was in season 2 that dealt with, I think, dealing with her daughter. Season 3, like, was that season 3 or season 4, dealing with the whole, I think that was season 3, maybe, where she basically, you got some voiceover from her when she was talking. She killed that lady that basically put a hit out on Joan. So I think that was it. So I was like, she's kind of brought up last season because the whole cabal popped up and everything last. But it's like, with Sherlock's dad at the top of the cabal and everything, it does make you, and Moriarty behind bars. I don't know, because the thing is, it comes down to what her schedule is like. I don't really know what she's working on right now. Is she on Game of Thrones? For some reason, I'm thinking like she is. She might be. So it's kind of like, production schedule and stuff like that. But I still want more Moriarty because I want more interactions because I like her as Moriarty. Because like the fact that that's like my favorite twist on like a tale. I'm not that familiar with Sherlock, but I've always appreciated the fact that they did that twist, making Moriarty actually Irene Adler, them being the same person rather than just being like two separate people. Making them the same person ends up kind of creating a complex relationship between Moriarty and Sherlock. So, or get Sherlock's brother, which we haven't seen him since, was that like season 2 or 3, especially because there's the whole thing between him and Joan. That in itself makes a whole complex relationship. But once again, like, because it comes down to whether the actor's busy or not, there's just so much I'd like to see, because I'm very interested to see, like, we set up that whole cabal situation last season. I wonder if that's going to play any part this season or not, because each season's kind of got like its main overall like thing that happens, and because it's like, yeah, you know what I mean, there's always like that big overarching story. I mean, I keep forgetting, like, Shinwell is kind of this season's big overarching story. Like, Sherlock's dad was the big one last season, but Shinwell's story is the big one this season. So I'm just very curious to see if any elements of that stuff set up from last season will kind of pop up. Anything Moriarty related, Cabal related, his dad related, whatnot. But like I said, currently it is Shinwell. So, but that's not a bad thing or anything. I'm just very curious to see where they decide to take the overall arcing story this season. So. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.